So the Middle East is exploding. Israel, Palestine in the worst violence in over a decade, in a violent battle between Jews and Arabs that has gone on for decades. And there used to be two sides, but these days there don't seem to be two sides to anything anymore. Just your side and the other side's wrong. It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how, in this time of division, we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
No, I understand what it's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says your headings. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show tonight. As always, coming at you from one of our two streaming live studios, virtual, though they are, in Florida, and Crafty in our studio in Los Angeles, and coming at you on all the social platforms you guys are on, whether that's Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And again, as always, I love your feedback, your comments. Just want to say, tonight we're doing a little fun experiment. One of our regular listeners, Tyler, on Facebook, who's always throwing shade on me, like literally, never agrees with anything I say, maybe 1 out of 100 times. Tyler has agreed to be on the stream, not on camera, but on the stream, and he is going to do his very best, without lying, without being dishonest or disingenuous, to try to see the other side, to try to find a common ground from where he sits to where the other side sits. So I'm going to encourage everybody out there watching today, if you want to play along, it's the I can see there's two sides to every story. So feel free to, follow Tyler and say, hey, this isn't what I normally would think, but I'm trying to see the other side. So to start this all out with where there seem to be two sides where no one can see the other side, and that's in the Middle East right now. Israel, Palestine, erupting. So I'm going to give you the quickest breakdown of what happened. But basically, there are 83 dead Palestinians. There are 6 dead Israelis and 1 Israeli soldier. And there's missiles flying left, right, and center. And all of this erupted. All of this erupted after the last couple of months. There's been tensions brewing. Israeli police barricaded Damascus Gate during Ramadan, a high holiday for Muslims, and at sort of the third holiest site in Islam, which is located in Jerusalem, the El Aqsa Mosque. There, they were going in and going out. The Jewish police force was, and meanwhile, there was a move to unsettle or move some Palestinians who live in a East Jerusalem neighborhood, which is heavily Arab. And they wanted to evict these families, the Jewish settlers. And all of this erupted with Hamas, the militant arm of the Palestinian government and Palestinian people, launching hundreds and hundreds of rockets at Israel. And Israel responding by launching targeted strikes that blow up buildings and kill military leaders and also kill lots of people. So the bottom line is you have a massive explosion like you've never seen. So if you follow politics or international politics or any of that at all, you know that Israel, the Israeli-Arab conflict has gone on for years. Jews versus Arabs, back and forth. And it's ugly, it's divisive, it's hateful, and both sides claim the other side is wrong. Israel claims the Arab nations have wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth for the last 70, 80 years. Palestinians and Arabs claim that the Israeli state and the Jewish people are unfairly occupying them, pushing them out, and particularly in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, basically holding the Palestinians hostage to an impoverished second-tier society and being brutal on them. When it comes to the violence, you have Israel, which has so much more military power, launching these targeted strikes into Palestine that inevitably kill civilians. They always do, because the Hamas military hides their military guys in civilian encampments. They put them in residential buildings. They put them in hospitals. It's pretty harsh because they basically letting them, put them there as like human shields. And the Israelis target, but they end up going, we're going to take casualties in the process. Meanwhile, Hamas just fires endless numbers. They fired 1,000+ rockets into Israel. But Israel has a air defense system, the Iron Dome, which if you watch video, you see them shooting up and blowing up most of the rockets. But they just randomly target anywhere in Israel where there are civilians. It's ugly. It's brutal. And I'll give you in a minute a quick timeline of things, but I just want to point out that it's disrupted a process that had slowly been inching toward maybe possibly somehow after decades finding a little more way to have peace and common ground in Israel and the Arab states. And the response in the U.S. is where I want to go to. Andrew Yang, running for mayor of New York City, posted a tweet, because again, this is all, there's no two sides. There's my side and your side doesn't exist. So I've talked about that in the US, but you see it lit up like in ugly flames when it comes to the Middle East. So here's Andrew Yang, an Asian man running for the mayor of New York City. I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. The people of New York City will always stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere. Clearly, I don't know Andrew Yang's politics, but I know he's running for mayor of a city that has a massive Jewish population, and he's appealing to the Jewish population. There's a much bigger Jewish population than Arab population in New York City. AOC responded to Dumbo Searlobes, "You ignoring the attack on the mosque whilst people were praying." I'm not ignoring the attack on the mosque while people were praying. I am trying to set this up, and I will be clear from the start. Both sides in the Middle East, both the Jews and the Israelis and the Arabs and the Palestinians and the surrounding Arab states have blood all over their hands. Both sides don't see the other side. We'll get into it in a second, Dumbo Searlobes, when I'm going to go back and just give you like a 1.5-minute version of what's happened in the last 70 years. But neither side gets to claim they're completely innocent of wrongdoing. That said, both sides claim that. Both sides are guilty of wrongdoing. AOC responds to Andrew Yang's tweet saying this: "Utterly shameful for Yang to try to show up at an Eid event," it was a Muslim event during Ramadan, "sending out a chest-thumping statement of support for a strike killing 9 children. But then to try that in Astoria during Ramadan, they will let you know." So clearly you see right here, not that Andrew Yang is on the right. This isn't necessarily a left-right divide, but Andrew Yang takes the side of Israel and the Jews. AOC takes the side of Palestine and the Arabs. And the other side is completely wrong. Gal Gadot, probably the most currently famous Israeli, living in America, the actress Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, tried to walk a middle line, posting what I thought was a beautiful message. Here it is. "My heart breaks. My country's at war. I worry for my family, my friends. I worry for my people. It's a vicious cycle that's been going on for far too long. Israel deserves to live as a free and safe nation. Our neighbors deserve the same. I pray for the victims and their families. I pray for this hostility to end, and our leaders find a solution so we can live side by side in peace. I pray for better days." Okay. Hard not to think that just is a thoughtful tweet. I'm Israeli. I'm Jewish. My family lives there. I care for them. I worry for them. I cry for them. But at the same time, the Palestinians suffering, living under oppression, horrible conditions, being bombarded by Israel, I fear for them too, and my heart breaks for them too. Why can't our leaders find a common ground so we can live together in peace? You would think people would go, what a thoughtful response. And don't get me wrong, like she had like 800,000 likes. But that said, she was immediately attacked. How could she defend Israel? How could she possibly say that there's even possibly two sides to this? Israel's wrong. The Arabs are right. She literally got blasted for it. And it trended on Twitter, with Twitter posting this. This is in a tweet, somebody reposting Twitter's message when something's trending. And it says this. The Twitter says movie stars trending. Gadot, people are recalling actor Gal Gadot's service in the Israel Defense Force after she shared a message responding to the accelerating violence between Israel and Palestine. And Ben Jacobs wrote, this is an interesting euphemism on Twitter's part for being bombarded with violent anti-Semitic attacks online. Because again, she was just blasted. And his point was, Twitter lets the hate feed run up and calls it a trending thing. I thought it was interesting because it is kind of what happens. Okay, Monkey Arms, unsettled. That's a nice word. Holy passive tyranny verbiage. Okay, you know what? Again, that's, I think, Monkey Arms, you're kind of making my point there, right? Because that is the whole idea. Like, if you're trying to simply take a position and say both sides are at fault. Look, this is a conflict, and by the way, let me before I get into the nitty gritty of it, let me show you. I found a classic clip. I miss Jon Stewart in The Daily Show. I miss Jon Stewart so much. The Daily Show is there still. I really can't stand, The Daily Show now, but I miss Jon Stewart. He was so smart, so funny. Yes, he was on the left, but he always found a way to kind of, again, make fun of both sides without hiding his politics. This is a clip of Jon Stewart 7 years ago on Israel and the Arabs.
We'll start tonight in the Middle East, where Israel... What? Israel isn't supposed to defend itself?
Oh, yeah, if Mexico bombed Texas, will we exercise
What other countries held to the same standard as Israel? People that want to destroy our terrorists?
What is the matter with you? It's the only democracy in the Middle East, you
Self-hating Jew?
I mean, it says it perfectly. Like, literally just a cacophony of screaming voices assaulting it. Look, people are forced to take a side, Secretary of State Blinken came out and said, there's a clear and absolute difference, quote, between a terrorist organization. Hamas is a terrorist organization funded by Iran, indiscriminately raining down rockets, in fact, targeting civilians, and Israel's response defending itself. Joe Biden came out and said, President Biden, I will stand by Israel's right to defend itself. That's one side of the debate. I have to take Tyler's comment because he's trying to see the other side. Tweets and IM and FB comments are terrible ways to communicate nuanced social issues. I couldn't agree more, Tyler. I think that's such a great point. People use tweets and text messages and Facebook posts for everything now. And as much as I don't want that to be the case, it is the case. It's the world we live in. It's how everyone communicates. So sadly, it's not going to stop. We're not going to stop using tweets to do it. And either way, even if we use words, it no longer matters in how clearly divided we are. Let me run you through a timeline because Krusen put up a comment, the unfortunate results of Trump-Kushner Middle East policy. And again, Krusen, this is where I'm going to go. You are going to pick on Trump doing something. And, I'm going to point out why in 2 minutes, why I totally disagree with that comment, because I believe Trump and Kushner's attempts to make change in the Middle East were successful. And I'll ramp up to that. So here you go. For those of you who want to know, here's like the 2 minute version of what happened. Just so if you don't know your background history, forgive me for making it quick and skimming over stuff. Basically, this goes back way back. But in 1948, essentially the first war erupts between Israel and Egypt and Jordan. And it all has to do with Britain being given a mandate to divide up the Palestinians, called the Palestinian Mandate. And they divided up between Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. And Egypt's given a protectorate over the Gaza Strip. And a battle emerges and Israel wins. 1956, Egypt President Nasser basically seizes, nationalizes the Suez Canal, cutting off trade. A war erupts. Britain and France join Israel. Israel wins. 1967, there's the famous 6-Day War, Egypt and Jordan against Israel. Israel, it wins that war, takes control of Gaza, Sinai, the West Bank, Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, sets up this whole occupied territory. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians get displaced. So it's all the seeds of this. 73, Egypt and Syria attack Israel in a surprise attack. 78, finally, Jimmy Carter, the one great thing I think he did as president of the Camp David Accords, for the first time an Arab nation recognizes Israel. Egypt and Israel make peace. In 87, an intifada, which is a massive uprising in Palestine against Israel, erupts. In 93, Clinton does the Oslo Accords, where Israel and the Palestinian liberation kind of come together. And that leads to the creation of what's now called the Palestinian Authority, which is the actual government of Palestine. Hamas is not the technical government, but they basically are. There's an authority that a 85-year-old guy named Abbas runs. He's the elected leader, and it's kind of a joke. Meanwhile, you know, all the settlement issues remain unresolved. In early 2000s, there's another intifada, goes on for years. Back and forth we go for the next 20 years, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. In 2020, Trump does what's called the Abraham Accords. And in the Abraham Accords, a number of Middle Eastern countries come together to essentially support peace with Egypt, countries who weren't involved in it before. The United Arab Emirates. So you have Egypt, Turkey, and Jordan. They've always been like, they're the first ones. So Sudan, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, all come in 2020 in the Abraham Accords. Try to do it. I'm going to go to Krusen's point, the bad policy. There was nothing wrong with what Trump did in the Middle East. The media just doesn't want to acknowledge he did something good. The reason it was good is because there was a normalization and a commercialization, and a lot of Arab countries going, let's see if we can't, by making peace with Israel, by coming together with Israel, we actually create a climate where Israel will slowly start backing up its occupation of Gaza and slowly start giving the Palestinians more room. Let's be honest, guys. If you are Israel, I'm going to try to take both sides real quickly. If you're Israel, you've been living with hostile nations surrounding you since 1948 who want to wipe you off the face of the earth, right after Hitler tried to wipe you off the face of the earth. One country surrounded. Yes, they're militarily powerful. Yes, they have our backing, but literally surrounded in a region that until recently only had 3 countries. You know, until the 2020 Accords, the Abraham Accords, you had Egypt, Turkey, and Jordan, and that was it. Saudi Arabia doesn't even recognize Israel. It's not just that they're not friends. They don't even recognize Israel's right to exist. And you're bombarded over and over and over again, attacked over and over and over again with not just like a war for territory, a war over the fact that you don't deserve to exist, an existential war. You think it's existential when you talk about Trump is going to destroy American democracy, which you wasn't even have a chance at doing. Our democracy's holding fine, strong. If you're Israel, you are an existential threat when every country around you wants you literally to be wiped off the map. And if you're the Palestinians, you've been crushed. You've been displaced for decades. You've been literally held as a second-class state, and your own countries around you have not let you grow, which was a cynical political move on the part of the Arab world to keep Palestine impoverished and broken as a tool, as a way to make the world sympathize and make Israel look bad. I mean, they could have built Palestine up. They could have poured billions of dollars of resources into it. These wealthy Arab oil countries, they didn't. They keep Palestine oppressed. So, and Israel pushes back and takes it out on the Palestinian people. It's two sides. The Palestinian people are getting screwed. They're getting screwed over and over and over again. But the Israeli people are also faced with an existential threat on a daily basis. The fact that Israel's numbers of deaths are low is merely because they have better technology. They can shoot down the missiles. Hamas fires 1,000 missiles at Israel just everywhere, all over the cities, Tel Aviv. Everyone's living in bomb shelters for the last 3 days, right? It's just in Palestine, people are unprotected. And as I said, the Hamas puts its leaders in populated areas so that you will have to strike a populated area to take out their military guys. They know Israel's going to strike them. They just want to be able to say, look, you killed 50 innocent people. They full well know Israel's going to do the strike, not to kill the 50 people, to kill the military leader. And they're not going to not do it. It's cynical on both sides. It's cynical and ugly on both sides. And the question becomes, why these divides? Like, you know, Gal Gadot's tweet, can we find a common ground? Can we somehow come together? And why we don't seem able to come together, no matter how hard we try. I'm going to back up a second. Veena Malik, Pakistani actress. Crafty, can we post her tweet? She posted this tweet. I would have killed all the Jews of the world, but I kept some to show the world why I killed them. Adolf Hitler. Okay, she has 1.2 million followers. That tweet, she took it down. She didn't get suspended. That kind of hate is out there, and it's rampant. And by the way, Hitler didn't say that. That's not actually something Hitler said. Hitler didn't really want to keep any alive. Hitler wanted to wipe the Jews out. That was his plan. But either way, tweeting that, I mean, it's literally a level of hate that is so deep. So deep and so unrelenting, and we politicize it. And who suffers? The Palestinian people. Here's the takeaways from this. Israel wins every time. Israel wins every time. General sides, iron sides. I think the big problem is that the Israeli government targets civilians. See, you're wrong. The Israeli government doesn't target civilians. The Israeli government supports the expansion of settlements, and it shoves civilian Arab citizens into pockets, and they harass them. Absolutely. But when it comes to the military conflict, Israel doesn't target civilians. Israel targets military targets very precisely. They almost always hit them. But Hamas puts its military leaders in places where they're near churches, near hospitals, in buildings that are residential, knowing full well that you will have to kill people to get their military leaders. This is not to say Israel doesn't have a lot of blood on its hands for what it's done to the Palestinian people. It has. It's used it for political advantage too. But to my takeaway, Dumbo Sirlob, surely a group of people who would have been kicked out wouldn't do that to someone else. Yes and no. Great point. But at the same time, I think, again, try not to see one side as being all right. Imagine you're Israel. Look at how we are. Look at how defensive we are as a people. Could you imagine if the United States was a small country surrounded completely by hostile enemies, a small little landmass with hostile enemies who say, we are going to make all Americans die. You don't deserve to live. You're all going to die. You don't deserve to exist. We'd be shooting them down. Every one of you would be shooting them down, right? Understand, Israel has been literally faced with an existential threat of extermination over and over again. That said, Israel has enormous military and technological power and has refused to give Palestine what Palestine wants, which is the two-state accord. Give Palestine its independent right to be its own state. They're playing the same game. And yes, they are oppressing the Palestinians ruthlessly. Back to my first takeaway. Israel always wins. Every single one of the examples I gave you, every war, every conflict, Israel wins. Doesn't matter. The other side never has enough firepower. Why is that takeaway important? Because it shows you this cycle isn't going to change. Israel will keep winning. Israel will keep winning if it's a military battle. To Krusen's point that Trump Kushner messed things up, the whole beauty of the Abraham Accords in 2020 was to try to get more Arab countries on board to go, you're not going to beat Israel with guns. And the major military powers in the region have already acknowledged that years ago and stopped trying to fight wars with them. You are going to win Israel over if you can create enough common ground, enough consensus, and enough opportunity to where Israel no longer has an excuse to not give Palestine its independent rights. That is what happened. All these countries, United Arab Emirates, who signed on the Abraham Accords, they've been very critical of Israel and defensive of the Palestinians in the last few days. But at the same time, if you read what, if you read what military analysts and Middle East analysts are saying, there's no way that these guys are ultimately going to turn full on Israel. They're not going to back out of what they agreed to in the Abraham Accords to recognize Israel because they want a relationship. They want a relationship because they want peace in the region. And they know the only way to get it is not through war. You're not going to beat the Israelis, and none of them all want to go to war. So Israel's going to have to step back, but Israel's not going to step back as long as, everybody and his neighbor is going, Palestine has a right to fire rockets at you, you bunch of scum Jews, you should die. It's not going to happen. It's just not. That's the takeaway too. The Middle Eastern countries, other than Palestine, want freedom. And Hamas and much of the Arab world, as I said, have used has used Palestine as a prop, as a political prop. There's going to need to be changes on both sides. But the bigger takeaway for me of all of this is, at what point do we go, this vicious cycle gets us nowhere? Nobody wins. Palestine isn't winning. Every single one of these conflicts, Palestine loses. Israel wins. Now, do they ultimately win? No, but they're doing fine. I don't agree, Krusen, that isolated Palestinians leaving war is the only option. Again, Krusen, I want to encourage you to try to see the other side. And I know you're Jewish, so obviously you're not anti-Jew unless you're like Jon Stewart, self-hating Jew. Joke. He's not. It was a joke. But I don't think they did. Palestine's been isolated for a long time. The movement to get these other countries on board recognizing Israel is a smart one. If enough countries, Saudi Arabia is thinking about it. If enough countries recognize Israel, as I said, has no more excuse to not work for peace. I disagree with you 100%, Monkey Arms. I do agree they had a hand in the circumstances, but did they earn the hate they reap? Again, sure. At some level, yes. But I'm going to go back to the fact that if because this all gets to how we look at politics even in our own country. If you come back to the fact that how we are as a people, right, how people operate, if you've been facing an existential threat where you're going to be wiped off the map, you're going to be violent in your response, in your defense. Both sides to blame. Here's what's an interesting takeaway to wrap this part about Israel up is, with all of this, how much coverage do you think it got in much of the mainstream media the last couple of days in the U.S.? Almost none until today. Here's a little headline. Last note on this. CNN. Crafty, can you put that headline up? CNN avoids the Israeli-Hamas conflict during prime time, spends over 90 minutes on Liz Cheney. Okay. Well, it's not just, thanks, Crafty, not just CNN, but I'm using CNN. It's a good example. AC360, Anderson Cooper, Cuomo Primetime, the first hour of CNN Tonight, Don Lemon, literally didn't talk about this 2 days ago or yesterday. Not at all. But they spend 90 minutes talking about Liz Cheney, our division, where we're divided, right? So Cuomo, Lemon, Cooper, don't even mention this. It's like, it's not making ratings for you, which is sad, because it might help us realize that we're in such a violent, divisive world right now. And by the way, we should be grateful that our conflict hasn't gone to that level. We're not literally shooting rockets at each other yet. But what we are doing is obsessing on a divide within our own political world, which leads me to the whole big issue of the big lie. Okay, the big lie. Let's get American politics. The big lie. Trump election fraud. Liz Cheney, the number 3 member of the House of Representatives, is removed as the number 3 Republican leader by the House. It's all over the news. If you follow politics at all, you've seen it. Liz Cheney standing up against the evil Donald Trump, standing up against the big lie, which, by the way, was a big lie, and standing, again, although she was hated and her father was hated, called a warmonger, now the media and the left loves her because she's heroic and brave in her willingness to stand up and defend America. Here's her tweet. Freedom only survives if we protect it. We must speak the truth. The election was not stolen. America has not failed. Okay, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. The election wasn't stolen, and America has not failed. 100% true. 100%. And I'll get into why I agree the whole big lie was a big lie. But here's the thing. What Liz Cheney's saying isn't completely true. And what's happening to Liz Cheney has nothing to do with what most of the media and the Democratic Party and people on the left think. Let me play a tiny, tiny clip of Liz Cheney's speech right before she was removed from office, or removed from her leadership post.
Every one of us who has sworn the oath must act to prevent the unraveling of our democracy. This is not about policy. This is not about partisanship. This is about our duty as Americans. I will not sit back and watch in silence while others lead our party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the former president's crusade to undermine our democracy.
So here's the thing. I want to be clear that the election was stolen is a big lie. I agree. Trump has been running a big lie. He's been pushing it. It's his narrative. I don't want to get into what's wrong in Trump's head. Maybe I will in a minute, why Trump does what he does, but it's pushing a big lie. But at the end of the day, Liz Cheney's not really out there standing up for democracy. I mean, it's sort of like I found a great tweet that somebody said, and I just want to put up because it's funny. She said, basically, oh, so brave, so brave. Crafty, can you put that tweet up? Okay, never mind. A comment to Liz Cheney's speech was, "You're so brave. How come you didn't say it sooner?" And again, she's being idolized, put on a pedestal as being this incredibly brave thing, this heroic act she's done. And I'm kind of like, really? Oh, there it is. Bravery would have been giving this speech during the first impeachment. He was a traitor then and a traitor now. She sat by and watched until it hurt her, which is so true, right? I mean, got to stop putting Liz Cheney on this weird pedestal. But here's the thing. I agree that Trump told the big lie. What I don't agree with is this whole narrative this dual narrative that somehow, the fate of our constitutional republic depends on basically all Republicans recognizing, throwing Trump under the bus, going a whole different way, and recognizing that, you're simply caving to the weird, mysterious, overwhelming power of the psycho dictator Trump. And that the Republicans are all bending on their knees to Trump and afraid to stand up for it. And it's Trump's party. And meanwhile, the country's going to go to hell in a handbag if we don't stand up against it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but, basically, the left, Schumer, she's a hero. Like, it's funny how your heroes, people you hate, become heroes when they go after somebody you hate even more. But here's the thing. Here's the triple number breakdown. Yes, it's a big lie. The election wasn't stolen. The election was not stolen. Anybody out there who's insisting it was stolen is telling a lie. Was there fraud? Probably yes, always has been. Were there irregularities? 100%. Did Democrats get the upper hand, taking advantage of the pandemic, pushing more people to vote, and probably making it easy for people to slip between the cracks? Absolutely. Was it enough to turn the election around? Doubt it. The election was close, though. Trump won 94% of Republicans, and he only lost by like 42,000 votes over 3 states that would have flipped the election. Were those all fraudulent? No. Biden won the election, fair and square. Trump lost the election, fair and square. End of story. It's a lie to say otherwise. Yet Trump perpetuates that lie. But Liz Cheney hates Trump. This is about Liz Cheney making her thing. I'm going to step out of the thing and I'm going to be big. I'm going to be big. I'm going to get all the light on me. This is about Liz Cheney being some heroic, stand up for what's right. Good God, she could have done that not just at the impeachment. She could have done that any number of times. Liz Cheney's right of right. I'm not a Liz Cheney fan, not a little bit. Never was. She's also just that mainstream ultra conservative Republican that I hate. Nothing about her has populism in it at all. Never found a war she doesn't like. I've gone off on her before. But here's the big third point. Republicans aren't doing this. Tyler, you're supposed to try to be seeing the other side. I call foul ball, pick your desire. The second somebody from the right agrees with the left. I don't know. I don't care. I am making both sides of this, and I'm going to get to it. Right now, the side that has been made largely, Tyler, almost exclusively, has been the side that Liz Cheney, I see your point. But I'm agreeing with the left that it's a lie, that the election steal was a lie, that it was never stolen. Liz Cheney can say it all she wants. That's not what this is about. My point isn't whether she's right that it's a lie. My point is whether she's right that somehow the soul of the Republican Party is crumbling and 90 million voters are all basically living a delusional lie, falling down a sinkhole that's going to destroy democracy. That's what I'm challenging. The Republican Party isn't falling apart, and the Republican Party isn't caving because they're afraid of Donald Trump. And here's why I'm going to go a different direction on this. Most Republicans know the election wasn't stolen. Most Republican leaders know the election wasn't stolen. But this isn't about Trump. This is about Democrats and raw politics. So here's where I'm going to make an argument that you on the left, I want to challenge you, and you, Tyler, who agreed to play this game today, to try to see the other side of the argument. Republicans are dumping Cheney, doing all this because they feel they're being set up by Democrats. And they are. They're probably right. Democrats want every Republican to acknowledge Trump as a horrible liar, which will piss off voters. They want to be vindicated in the media and in themselves that, see, we were right. Everything we said for the 4 years Trump was president, even though it was a lot of lies on our part, proved to be true at the end of the day, because look what he did. Trump is horrible. It'll strengthen the Democratic base and it'll weaken the Republican base. It's raw politics, guys. This is my point. It's raw politics. I worked in the Clinton administration right around the impeachment. It's the same process went on. We sat inside the White House and talked about how people were pissed at Clinton inside the White House that he wouldn't just come out and tell the truth, because it was just politics, that the Republicans know that this is just a tool they're going to use to try to impeach you. And it's a political game. Republicans knew it. Republicans knew what they were doing. They were just going to try to take down Clinton. And people were pissed inside the White House. It's like, don't let them do it. Republicans are getting that message going, we're not going to let the Democrats take us down by getting us all to basically go, Trump's horrible, Trump lied, All you voted for him are horrible. We need to somehow be virtuous and stand above the fray and watch our entire political base crumble and let Democrats get elected. It's pure politics, guys. The Democrats are on a purely political move to try. They're not wrong that there was no election steal, but it's a purely political move to destroy the Republican Party. These guys don't play for values. They don't play for the true morality. They don't play to do the right thing. They just accuse each side of not doing the right thing. And, then when it's their turn, don't do the right thing either. And that's what's really going on. So, basically the question is, why don't they care? Why don't voters, why don't so many people care about what Trump said, that Trump's pushed a big lie? And to me, that answer is everything, because Trump is pushing a big lie, but it's Big Lie, the sequel. It's Big Lie, the sequel. The first big lie, get ready for it, guys. If you're on the left, try to go with me for a second. 4 years, Trump's not a legitimate president. 4 years coming up with every possible way to remove him from office from day one, delegitimizing him, claiming Russian collusion, doing a massive Mueller investigation, spending millions of dollars, endless time, constant airwaves. They couldn't prove Russian collusion. You might, and again, if you're out there, you're going to go, well, they couldn't prove it, but it happened. That's no different than what Trump's doing. Couldn't prove it, but it happened. They couldn't prove it because it didn't happen. First of all, Trump's campaign couldn't have coordinated with the Russians, couldn't have figured out how to do that. They were so disheveled. Secondly, they ran mostly a digital campaign. Thirdly, Russia didn't want to help Trump. Russia just wanted to destabilize our elections, which they did. So at the end of the day, despite all the attempts to prove it, it didn't pan out. What finally panned out was impeaching him on the Ukraine thing. And the Ukraine thing, well, it was wrong. I've argued to people before. Every president has calls like that. Trump was on a call that he knew other people were on. Whatever he said, he felt he was okay saying. Was it right to do? Probably not. How you think most presidents don't have those calls, don't do those things, don't play politics? I mean, on both sides, Lyndon Johnson, one of the dirtiest presidents ever, Richard Nixon, to pick one on each side. It's what they do. Obama probably didn't do it as much, and Clinton didn't do it as much, and Bush too didn't. I don't know about Bush 1. He was a stand-up guy in a way, but he also ran the CIA, so who knows what they really did, behind the scenes. But basically, Republican voters are looking, going, you delegitimized our president for 4 years, every possible chance, endlessly, day after day. There was no accomplishment he could do that was good. Look, even Kristen pointing out, it's not okay that Middle East peace, bad. If Biden had done Middle East peace, it'd be great. Highest job, lowest unemployment, highest job growth, best economy in years. Horrible, bad. Not about him. Second Chance Act, first major criminal justice reform, bad. No, it's like one thing after the other. No legitimacy, no credibility. That's what hit Republican voters, and Republican leaders are going, we are not going to let you knock us down a step further. We're going to play dirty just like you are. Both sides are playing dirty. But here's the thing, after a relentless, never-ending assault, right, you essentially now have the big lie too, which is we don't care. We're going to do the same thing you did. And you think I'm making this up? Look at these two polls. Found two polls. Again, one's from NBC and one, I'm going to put them up. I'll give you the headlines on the polls. One's a Washington Post ABC News poll. Crafty, can we put up those two things about the voters? Majority of young Americans view Trump as an illegitimate president. 57% of adults in 2017 polled viewed Trump as an illegitimate president. 75% of 18 to 30-year-old, thanks, Crafty, Black voters, like 60%, I think, of Latinos, 57% overall, and even 47% of white 18 to 30-year-old voters all viewed Trump a year after as illegitimate, not a legitimate president. The second one is response Hillary. Christian Science Monitor, a third of Clinton supporters said Trump's victory was illegitimate. 33% of Clinton supporters in 2016, November 2016, after the election. Thanks, Crafty. 33% after the election. 33% of voters, Clinton supporters after the election, 2016, not this election, the last one. Clinton supporters, Trump was not legitimately elected president. You guys forget that? You forget that from day one, a third to half the Democrats insisted Trump was illegitimately elected. That's a big lie too. And then 4 years of being harassed, hammered, beaten down, pummeled. Yeah, Yeah, Trump made up a big lie. I would argue to some extent that the left empowered him to do it. He was like, you've gone after me relentless. Trump's an egomaniac. Trump can't see that he's wrong. Trump's incapable of acknowledging he's always a horrible president. For that reason alone, he's a divider. He makes it all about himself. The narcissist in chief could never acknowledge, could never seek common ground. But you go after a person like that, claim he's illegitimate from day one, and then attack him endlessly no matter what he does. What do you expect him to do? You expect him to come out and be like, all right, let's be nice? No, he goes completely psycho sociopath on it and go, pathological. And it's like, boom. Cruson, I'm sorry you think it's a sad both sidism argument you've heard in a while, but I would say to me, your comment is one of the saddest comments I've heard in a while. And I'm not saying that to be petty. I'm saying if you can't see that this argument is literally why we're divided, to suggest Trump claiming this election was stolen is the same thing. The outcome was worse. What happened was worse. The radicalization part was worse. The attack on the Capitol, sure. I'm not saying Obama was like Trump. I'm not saying Biden's like Trump. But I'm saying the way Trump was treated, the way the media treated him, the way people delegitimized his election and that got no attention, merely makes people on the right, millions and millions of people go, you said it was okay when you did it. Now it's not okay when we do it. And it makes them not care. I don't think most of them think the election was stolen. They just don't care. They just think the other side isn't playing fair. So if you don't get my two-sidism argument here, isn't to say what Trump's big lie was somehow not worse than the other side. I'm not saying that. I do think suggesting the election was stolen from the president is a horrible thing to do. My point is, half the country thought the election was stolen last time too, and the media let that one go. So if you're the people, not Trump, who feel like he got dumped on for 4 years and was told he was illegitimate and their votes are illegitimate and they're horrible, rotten people, they're going to go, F you, we don't care. We don't care. Trump was impeached 2 times. Yes, he was impeached twice in a partisan impeachment. And you can argue whether he should or shouldn't have been impeached, but plenty of people argue he shouldn't have been. Maybe the second time, yeah. The first time, no. I would argue no. But either way, right, he wasn't convicted. It was a hyper-partisan impeachment. The founders, when they created the impeachment, the whole point was it shouldn't be hyper-partisan, and it was. Point out, the second impeachment, he actually had 17 votes from Republicans. That was at least slightly nonpartisan. But so it's not about Trump being impeached 2 times. You guys are stuck on Trump. There's 90 million people who feel they've been invalidated and watch that invalidation go on for 4 years, not just about the guy they elected, but about everything he did and about them, about their own values. And now they're going, you know what? I don't care that now you guys are in charge, the other side, and you suddenly want to say we're all worthless, we're all horrible, we're all anti-patriotic, we're all out to destroy the Constitution in America. That's by inference what we're saying. We're not just attacking Trump. Trump's the most popular figure in the Republican Party, not because he tells the big lie, which I think most people know, because they feel like he stood up to a system that just dumped on him. So in reality, it's not about Trump's big lie. It's about the whole half of the country that feels they're being impugned simply for supporting a guy who they legitimately elected the first time and was dumped on for that. It's not about Trump. Stop making this about Donald Trump. We got to let go of Donald Trump, which, by the way, we're not going to. You guys are going to get Donald Trump reelected. You are going to get him reelected. This process, Democrats are making a dangerous gambit. If they think somehow that the Republican Party is falling apart and Trump's gone down the sinkhole. Jeff Greenfield wrote a brilliant piece, left of center journalist, about all this, sort of saying it's a dangerous thing to think that the Republican Party is divided and then Trump is basically, you have to separate from Trump. Trump's the most popular guy in the Republican Party, and he could well win re-election, and this might get him reelected. So then we'll have 4 more years of her. Can you imagine if Trump gets reelected, what kind of a mess we'll be in? And forget about what he'll do for the country, what he'll do. The division we will go into a civil war. People will go nuts, but he might well get reelected. And I promise you this, right now, you're going to see in the midterms, Republicans get elected, because here's the bottom line I want to take away from this. And again, I think my exercise in trying to see both sides on this issue failed miserably. I will own a big fail. But Biden's in trouble. Biden, when Biden asked about Liz Cheney, his response was, "It's above my pay grade." I thought, what a clever response. It's like, he didn't go, "Yeah, good for her for standing up." He was like, "It's above my pay grade." A little joke, obviously not above his pay grade, but he's kind of like, I don't even understand my own party. I don't want to try to understand theirs. Biden wants to pass an agenda, and he's in trouble passing that agenda right now. He needs support from the other side. He's not trying to be bipartisan because he wants to like look good. He recognizes he can't get anything done if he doesn't bring the other side on. You know, the voting rights bill that they're pushing, the For the People, the first bill they put out, is going to fail because Joe Manchin just said, "I won't support it." Joe Manchin just said, "I won't support that act. I will support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act," which is a smaller version of that, but I won't support the For the People. It's dead. They're not going to get one Republican vote, and they just lost one Democratic vote. It's dead. His infrastructure bill is in trouble because Republicans aren't going to support the massive infrastructure bill. And they can't just do a reconciliation because Manchin and Sinema, both Democratic senators, won't support using reconciliation for everything, which is a complex process where as long as there's budgetary implications, you can skip needing the 60 vote threshold. And they won't get rid of the filibuster. Biden's watching his entire agenda being imperiled. He knows he needs the other side. And right now, that those sides are spreading farther and farther apart. So if you care about those things, if you want to see his initiatives pass, you got to start finding common ground with the people on the other side. You don't have to like Trump. You don't have to accept his big lie, but recognize why so many people don't care that he's making the big lie. They don't care that he's lying because they're so pissed at the other side, which kind of brings it back to what's happening in Israel and with Israel and Palestine. Nobody cares about the other side. Two sides wrong. Two sides do bad things. Both sides say only the other side's wrong. That's the state of American politics today. And it's going to imperil an agenda, even in its a reduced form, that has so many good things for America. You know, there's so much. I'm not 100% on board what Biden wants to do, but some of what he wants to do makes sense and needs to happen. And we are literally missing the opportunity. Tyler, before we close, Tyler makes one point where he tries to find the other side. Thank you, Tyler. Tyler couldn't quite do it. I can understand the right feeling, Trump being the victim. It's a signature move. Victim, lower class, white angst politics. Okay, Tyler. Tyler, you failed as well as me on this finding the other side. You can't really understand it. And I'm going to wrap it on this note. You don't understand it if you think it is Trump's signature move, but Trump's a political mastermind at trying to move people, that way, right? He's crafty and dangerous in that regard. But if you think the average person is just it's white angst, it's not. It's not white angst. And again, you are throwing millions and millions of people into a bucket that's a small number of people who are doing that. It's also tons of people, Black, white, Latino, who voted for Trump, middle, lower, upper income, educated and uneducated, rednecks to elites who feel like they liked what Trump stood for. They liked that Trump was actually bucking the system. And while he may have messed up a whole lot of things and been a horribly divisive president and a rotten human being, they liked what he stood for in the beginning, and they hate the fact that they've been vilified for it. And if you want to just say it's just white, like snowflaking on the right, you can say that. You will see none of Biden's agenda get through, because my point to go back to is Republicans in Congress know this and they aren't going to fall for it. And they're like, we will stand up and not do it. And in 2 years, we'll take back control of the House and probably the Senate, and Biden will get even less done or get it done on our terms. And in 4 years, we'll take back the White House and our cycle will continue, or we'll start realizing there really are two sides to every story. Really two sides. Both are valid. Both. And I actually see both. Can you? It's Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.